I never thought I would watch someone call a tow truck on an active ambulance, but living in Meadowbrook Heights HOA in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, taught me that some people have absolutely no limits to their petty tyranny. My name is Grant Peterson, and I have been living in this neighborhood for 3 years now. I moved here after taking a job as a software engineer at a tech company downtown. The house was perfect, the yard was nice, and the location was convenient. What I didn't realize when I signed the mortgage papers was that I was also signing up for a never-ending battle with the most insufferable HOA board president in the entire state of Arizona. Her name was Patricia Hendricks, though everyone called her Karren behind her back. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA Karren. Middle-aged, always wearing those chunky statement necklaces, haircut in that signature angular bob, and she drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I speak to managers professionally." I'm not even kidding about that last part. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March when everything went down. I was working from home, sitting at my desk in my home office that overlooked the street. The weather was beautiful, that perfect Arizona spring day where it hits about 75 degrees, and there's not a cloud in the sky. I had my window open, enjoying the breeze while I debugged some code for a client presentation. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard the sirens. Living in a residential area, you don't hear emergency vehicles that often, so when you do, it immediately catches your attention. I looked out my window and saw an ambulance turning onto our street, lights flashing but the siren cutting off as it slowed down. The ambulance pulled up in front of the Ramirez house, which was 3 doors down from mine on the opposite side of the street. I watched as 2 paramedics jumped out, pulling a gurney and medical equipment from the back. They moved with that practiced urgency that emergency responders have, quick but controlled. One was a younger guy, maybe late 20s with dark hair, and the other was a woman who looked to be in her 40s with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. They rushed up to the Ramirez house, and Mrs. Ramirez, Elena, opened the door before they could even knock. Elena was a sweet woman in her early 70s who lived with her husband Roberto. They had moved to the neighborhood about a year before I did, and they were the kind of neighbors who would bring you homemade tamales during the holidays and always waved when they saw you. I felt my stomach drop watching the paramedics rush inside. I hoped Roberto was okay. I tried to focus back on my work, but I kept glancing out the window. The ambulance sat there with its lights still rotating, parked partially on the street and partially on the Ramirez driveway approach. It was not blocking traffic. Our street was a quiet cul-de-sac with minimal through traffic anyway. The positioning made sense because they needed to keep the back doors accessible for loading a patient. About 10 minutes after the ambulance arrived, I saw Patricia's white Lexus cruising down the street. She drove slowly, like she was patrolling the neighborhood looking for violations, which, knowing her, she probably was. I had dealt with Patricia's nonsense before. She once threatened to fine me because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was literally collection day and the truck just had not come yet. Another time she left a nastily worded notice on my door because my grass was a 1/4 inch longer than the HOA guiulation allowed, never mind that my lawnmower had broken and I was waiting for a part to arrive. I watched as Patricia's Lexus came to a stop near the ambulance. She sat in her car for a moment, and I could see her head moving as she looked at the emergency vehicle. Then she pulled out her phone. My gut told me this was not going to be good. Sure enough, Patricia got out of her car holding a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. She walked right up to the ambulance and stood there, looking at it like it was some kind of illegally parked eyesore instead of an emergency vehicle actively being used to help someone. She walked around it, taking notes on her clipboard. Then, she took photos with her phone from multiple angles. I shook my head and tried to get back to work, but I could not concentrate. Something about the whole scene bothered me. About 5 minutes later, Patricia was still out there, now on her phone making a call. She paced back and forth on the sidewalk, gesturing animatedly as she talked to whoever was on the other end. Then I saw something that made me stand up from my desk. A tow truck was coming down our street. A big, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck with the logo of a local towing company on the side. It pulled up behind the ambulance and stopped. "No way," I said out loud to my empty office. "There is no way she actually did that." But she did. Patricia walked over to the tow truck driver as he got out, pointing at the ambulance and showing him her clipboard. The driver, a heavy-set guy in a stained work shirt, looked confused. He kept shaking his head and pointing at the ambulance like he was trying to explain something obvious to her. Patricia was having none of it. She jabbed her finger at her clipboard, then at the ambulance, her body language making it clear she was insisting he do his job. I could not take it anymore. I got up from my desk and headed outside. By the time I reached the street, a small crowd had gathered. A few other neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Dan Martinez from 2 houses down and Sarah Wu, who lived across the street from the Ramirez family. "What's going on?" Sarah asked as I walked up. "I think Patricia just called a tow truck on the ambulance," I said, still not quite believing it myself. "She what?" Dan said, his eyes going wide. "That is insane." We were not the only ones who thought so. The tow truck driver was still arguing with Patricia. "Madam, I cannot tow an ambulance that is actively on a call," the driver said, his voice loud enough that we could hear from where we stood. "That is not legal, and it is not happening." "I am the HOA president, and that vehicle is in violation of our parking regulations," Patricia said, her voice shrill. Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no commercial vehicles may be parked on the street for longer than 15 minutes. That ambulance has been there for nearly 20 minutes now. "It is an ambulance," the driver said slowly, like he was talking to a child. "An emergency vehicle, actively responding to an emergency. I am not touching it." "Then I will report your company for breach of contract," Patricia snapped. "I called you to remove an illegally parked vehicle, and you are refusing to do your job." The driver threw his hands up in exasperation. "Lady, you are crazy. I am leaving." He started walking back toward his truck. Patricia's face turned red, and she chased after him. "You cannot just leave. I am a paying customer. And I'm not getting sued or arrested for interfering with emergency services," the driver shot back. He climbed into his truck, started it up, and drove away, leaving Patricia standing in the street looking furious. But instead of letting it go, Patricia marched right up to the ambulance. She started banging on the back doors with her fist. "Excuse me, you need to move this vehicle immediately," she shouted. "You are in violation of HOA regulations." Sarah gasped beside me. "Is she serious right now?" The back doors of the ambulance opened, and the male paramedic stuck his head out. His face was flushed, and he looked stressed. "Madam, we are treating a patient experiencing a cardiac event," he said firmly. "We cannot move the vehicle right now. Please step back." "I do not care what you are doing," Patricia said, her voice rising. "This is a violation of our community rules. You need to move this vehicle to the street or leave the property entirely." "It is mostly on the street," the paramedic said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "And again, we are treating a patient. This is an emergency." "Everything is an emergency with you people," Patricia said dismissively. "I'm sure whoever is in there can wait a few more minutes while you move your vehicle properly." I had heard enough. I walked over, with Dan and Sarah following close behind. "Patricia, what is wrong with you?" I said, not bothering to hide my anger. "They are helping Roberto. Leave them alone." Patricia whirled around to face me. "Grant, this does not concern you. I am enforcing the rules that we all agreed to when we bought property in this community." "Roberto might be dying in there, and you are worried about parking?" Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "Have you lost your mind?" "The rules exist for a reason," Patricia said primly. "If we let one person break them, even emergency services, then it sets a precedent. Next thing you know, we will have plumbers and electricians parking on the street all day." "It is an ambulance," Dan shouted, "not a plumber's van." The female paramedic came around from the front of the ambulance. She looked exhausted and angry. "Madam, I need you to step away from our vehicle and stop interfering with our work," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "What you are doing right now is actually illegal. You are obstructing emergency services." "I am doing no such thing," Patricia said. "I am simply informing you of the HOA regulations. And I am informing you that if you do not step back right now, I will call the police and have you arrested," the paramedic said. "We have a 74-year-old man in cardiac distress, and every second counts. So unless you want to be responsible for his death because you delayed our treatment, I suggest you back off." That seemed to get through to Patricia, at least partially. She took a step back but did not leave. Instead, she pulled out her phone again. I am documenting all of this, she said, starting to take video. The HOA will be fining the ambulance company for this violation, and I am gathering evidence. The male paramedic came back out of the ambulance. We are ready to transport, he called to his partner. Let's move. The two paramedics went back into the Ramirez house, and a moment later they came out with Roberto on the gurney. Elena was with them, her face streaked with tears, clutching a purse and her phone. Roberto had an oxygen mask on his face and was hooked up to various monitors. He looked gray and weak, and my heart ached seeing him like that. As the paramedics loaded Roberto into the ambulance, Patricia was still filming and making comments. "Note the timestamp," she said into her phone. "The vehicle has now been illegally parked for 28 minutes. Elena, who was about to climb into the ambulance to ride with her husband, heard this and stopped. She turned to look at Patricia, and the expression on her face was one of pure heartbreak and disbelief. "Patricia," Elena said, her voice breaking, "my husband might be having a heart attack, and you are worried about parking?" "I'm sorry about Roberto," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she was not sorry at all. "But rules are rules, Elena. This is not personal." "Not personal?" Elena's voice rose. "You are threatening to fine the people trying to save my husband's life." The female paramedic gently took Elena's arm. "Mrs. Ramirez, we need to go now," she said softly but urgently. Elena let herself be guided into the ambulance, still staring at Patricia in shock. The paramedics closed the doors, and within seconds the ambulance was pulling away, sirens wailing as it rushed toward the hospital. The moment the ambulance disappeared around the corner, the neighbors who had gathered started laying into Patricia. "That was disgusting," Sarah said. "Absolutely disgusting." "You should be ashamed of yourself," an older man named Frank called out. Frank lived next door to me and was a retired teacher. Patricia looked around at all the angry faces and lifted her chin defensively. "I was simply doing my job as HOA president. Someone has to maintain standards in this community." "By harassing paramedics?" I said incredulously. "Patricia, that was beyond inappropriate. That was inhumane." "You are all being dramatic," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "The ambulance was parked illegally. I addressed it. If you have a problem with the HOA rules, you can bring it up at the next board meeting." "I will do more than that," I said. "I'm going to file a formal complaint against you." "File whatever you want," Patricia said smugly. "I have the bylaws on my side." She turned and walked back to her Lexus, got in, and drove away. The rest of us stood there in stunned silence for a moment. "I cannot believe what I just witnessed," Sarah finally said. "We have to do something about her," Dan said. "This is too far, even for Patricia." "Agreed," I said. "But first, let's make sure Roberto's okay. Does anyone have Elena's cell phone number?" Sarah did, and she texted Elena right there to let her know we were all thinking of them and to please keep us updated. Then we exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet the next day to discuss what to do about Patricia. I went back inside my house, but I could not focus on work anymore. I kept replaying the scene in my head. The image of Patricia banging on that ambulance door, demanding they move while they were treating a man having a heart attack, was burned into my brain. I had dealt with difficult HOA board members before, but this was a whole new level of crazy. That evening, I did some research. I looked up Arizona laws regarding obstruction of emergency services. It turned out that what Patricia had done was actually illegal. According to Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-2810, it is a Class 1 misdemeanor to interfere with emergency medical services personnel in the performance of their duties. The statute specifically mentions delaying or obstructing emergency responders. I printed out the relevant statutes and started drafting a formal complaint, but I wanted to do more than just complain to the HOA board. Patricia was on the board. She practically ran it. The other two board members, Margaret Chen and Bill Davidson, were nice enough people, but they generally just went along with whatever Patricia wanted. I needed to think bigger. Around 8 that evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "I just heard from Elena," Sarah said. "Roberto is stable. They got him to the hospital in time. He did have a heart attack, but they were able to perform an angioplasty and put in a stent. The doctors said if the paramedics had been delayed any longer, it could have been much worse." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank God. That is great news." "Yeah," Sarah said. "But Grant, Elena is talking about suing Patricia and the HOA. She is furious. Her son is a lawyer in Tucson, and she called him from the hospital. He is apparently looking into it. Good, I said. Patricia needs to face some consequences for what she did today. I agree, Sarah said. Dan and I were talking, and we want to organize a special meeting to vote Patricia off the board. We have been researching the HOA bylaws, and there is a provision for removing a board member with a 2/3 vote of the homeowners. Count me in, I said immediately. What do you need me to do? We talked for another 30 minutes, making plans. Sarah was a marketing consultant and had experience organizing events. Dan worked in project management. Between the three of us, we figured we could mobilize the neighborhood. We decided to start by going door to door, talking to neighbors, and getting signatures on a petition calling for Patricia's removal. The next day was Wednesday, and I took the afternoon off work to help with our door-to-door campaign. Sarah, Dan, and I divided up the neighborhood and started knocking on doors. The response was overwhelming. Almost every single person we talked to had a horror story about Patricia. One couple, the Johnsons, told us about how Patricia had fined them $500 because they planted roses in their front yard that were a shade of pink not approved in the HOA guidelines. Another neighbor, a single mom named Linda Garrison, said Patricia had threatened to put a lien on her house because her son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. By the end of the day, we had signatures from 42 of the 68 houses in the neighborhood. We needed 2/3 of homeowners to vote Patricia out, which meant we needed at least 46 votes. We were confident we could get there. On Thursday, Elena came home from the hospital. Roberto was still in the hospital but doing well, and Elena needed to rest and take care of some things at home. Sarah and I went over to check on her and bring her some groceries. Elena looked exhausted but angry. I cannot believe Patricia did that, she said as we sat in her living room. I keep playing it over in my mind. Roberto was fighting for his life, and she was worried about parking rules. It was unconscionable, I said. But Elena, we are working on getting her removed from the board. We have a petition with over 40 signatures already. Elena shook her head. That is good, but it is not enough. My son Carlos has been talking to some colleagues. What Patricia did was not just rude, it was illegal. Interfering with emergency services is a crime in Arizona. I found that statute too, I said. Do you think we should report it to the police? Carlos thinks we should, Elena said. He also thinks the paramedics should file a report, and he is looking into a civil lawsuit against Patricia personally and the HOA for emotional distress and endangerment. I will admit, part of me felt like that might be going too far, but then I remembered Patricia banging on that ambulance door, and I thought about what could have happened if the paramedics had been distracted or delayed even a few more minutes. Roberto could have died, and even if he had not, the stress Elena went through was directly because of Patricia's actions. Whatever you decide to do, we will support you, Sarah said firmly. On Friday, things escalated. Patricia sent out an email to the entire HOA mailing list. In it, she claimed that she had been harassed and threatened by neighbors for simply doing her job. She said that the ambulance had been parked illegally and that she had followed proper protocol by documenting the violation. She made no mention of the fact that they were treating a patient having a heart attack or that she had tried to have the ambulance towed and had banged on the doors while they were working. The email was so tone-deaf and self-serving that it actually helped our cause. Several neighbors who had been on the fence about signing the petition came to us after reading it. By Friday evening, we had 54 signatures. On Saturday morning, I got a call from Dan. Turn on the news, he said. Channel 12. I grabbed my remote and flipped to the local news station. There, on my TV screen, was footage of our street from Tuesday. Someone, I later found out it was Frank who lived next door to me, had recorded the entire incident on his phone from his upstairs window. He had sent the footage to the local news, and they were running it as a story. The segment showed Patricia arguing with the tow truck driver, then banging on the ambulance doors, then filming while Roberto was loaded onto the gurney. The news anchor's voice provided commentary. In a shocking display of callousness, an HOA president in suburban Phoenix called a tow truck on an ambulance that was treating a cardiac patient. The incident has sparked outrage in the Meadowbrook Heights community. Then the segment cut to an interview with Frank. It was one of the most appalling things I have ever seen, Frank said on camera. This man was having a heart attack and she was worried about parking regulations. It was inhumane. The news anchor came back on screen. We reached out to Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president in question, but she declined to comment. The HOA board also did not respond to our requests for a statement. The patient, who we are not naming for privacy reasons, is recovering at a local hospital. My phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors who were watching. The story was also posted on the news station's website and social media, and it was getting hundreds of comments, almost all of them condemning Patricia. By Saturday afternoon, the story had gone viral. It was picked up by national news outlets, shared thousands of times on social media, and Patricia was being raked over the coals. Someone had identified her and found her social media profiles, which she had to make private after being flooded with angry messages. The hashtag #HoKarren started trending on Twitter. Patricia sent out another email to the HOA, this one much more defensive. She claimed the video was taken out of context and that she had been respectful and professional at all times. She accused Frank of defamation and threatened legal action against anyone spreading false narratives about her. This email was somehow even worse than the first one. She still was not apologizing or even acknowledging that what she did was wrong. She was doubling down. On Sunday, Carlos Ramirez came to town from Tucson. He was a sharp-looking guy in his early 40s, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt despite it being the weekend. Sarah, Dan, and I met with him and Elena at their house. "First, I want to thank you all for supporting my parents," Carlos said. "My father's doing well and should be home in a few days, but what happened on Tuesday cannot stand. I've consulted with my colleagues, and we believe we have grounds for several legal actions." He laid out a folder of documents on the dining room table. First, criminal charges. Interfering with emergency services is a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona. I spoke with the paramedics who treated my father, and they are willing to file a police report and testify if necessary. Second, a civil lawsuit against Patricia Hendricks personally for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Third, a lawsuit against the HOA for negligent supervision of board members and for creating policies that enabled this kind of behavior. "Do you really think the HOA as a whole should be sued?" I asked. Most of us did not support what Patricia did. "The HOA gave her the authority she abused," Carlos said. "And the bylaws she was citing are real, even if her application of them was insane. The HOA has liability here." We talked for over an hour, discussing strategy. Carlos agreed to hold off on filing the civil lawsuits until after we tried to remove Patricia from the board. He wanted to give the community a chance to correct itself first, but the criminal charges were going forward regardless. On Monday morning, the Phoenix Police Department announced they were investigating the incident. A detective contacted the paramedics, Patricia, and several witnesses, including me. I gave a statement describing everything I saw. I also provided the detective with the video footage that Frank had recorded. Patricia apparently told the police that she had been exercising her authority as HOA president and had done nothing wrong. According to the detective who interviewed me, Patricia seemed to genuinely believe she had been in the right. "Does she have any chance of avoiding charges?" I asked the detective, a middle-aged woman named Detective Sarah Keller. "Between you and me, no," Detective Keller said. "The statute is pretty clear, and we have video evidence and multiple witnesses. The paramedics have also filed a formal complaint. The county attorney will make the final decision, but I would be shocked if charges are not filed." On Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the ambulance incident, we held a special meeting of the HOA. According to the bylaws, we needed a quorum of 51% of homeowners to hold a valid meeting, and we needed 2/3 to vote a board member out. We had secured commitments from 56 homeowners to attend, out of 68 total. The meeting was held at the Community Center Clubhouse at 7 in the evening. Sarah, Dan, and I arrived early to set up. We had printed copies of the petition, the relevant bylaws, and a timeline of events. We also had Frank bring his laptop in case we needed to show the video. People started arriving around 6:45. The room filled up quickly. I saw neighbors I knew well, and some I had only waved to in passing. Almost everyone looked angry or determined. This was not a normal HOA meeting about landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. This was something bigger. Patricia arrived at exactly 7, along with the other 2 board members, Margaret and Bill. Patricia looked composed, but I could see tension around her eyes. She took her seat at the front table and banged her gavel. "This meeting will come to order," she said in her crisp, authoritative voice. "I understand some members have concerns they wish to address." I stood up. Sarah had nominated me to speak first since I had witnessed everything firsthand. "Patricia, we are here to call for a vote to remove you from the board," I said, my voice steady. "Your actions last Tuesday were unacceptable, inhumane, and illegal. You attempted to have an ambulance towed while paramedics were treating a patient having a heart attack. You banged on the ambulance doors and interfered with emergency personnel doing their jobs. You showed no compassion or common sense, and you have brought national embarrassment to this community." There was a murmur of agreement from the assembled homeowners. Patricia's face remained impassive. "I was enforcing the HOA bylaws, which is my job as president. The ambulance was in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 3, which prohibits commercial vehicles from parking on the street for more than 15 minutes. An ambulance is not a commercial vehicle in the context of that bylaw," Carlos said, standing up. He had come to the meeting with Elena, who sat beside him looking tired but resolute. "That bylaw is intended to prevent contractors and delivery trucks from blocking the streets. It was never intended to apply to emergency services, and any reasonable person would understand that." "The bylaw does not specify exceptions," Patricia said stubbornly. "The law does," Carlos shot back. "Arizona law explicitly protects emergency services from this kind of interference. What you did was not just wrong, Patricia. It was criminal. The police are investigating you right now." That got a reaction from the room. Several people started talking at once. Patricia banged her gavel. "That investigation is baseless, and I am confident I will be cleared. I broke no laws." "You called a tow truck on an ambulance?" someone shouted from the back. It was Linda, the single mom. "You could have killed Roberto," another voice called out. The room erupted. Everyone started yelling at Patricia at once. She banged her gavel repeatedly, her face flushing red. "Order! Order!" she shouted. Margaret, one of the other board members, leaned over and said something to Patricia. Patricia shook her head firmly. Bill, the third board member, looked deeply uncomfortable. I held up my hand, and the room gradually quieted down. "We have a petition here signed by 54 homeowners calling for your removal," I said. "According to our bylaws, we can vote you out with a 2/3 majority. We are here to take that vote." "You cannot just vote me out," Patricia said, though she sounded less certain now. "There are procedures." "We have followed them," Sarah said, standing up. She held up a copy of the bylaws. Section 12, Paragraph 7. A board member may be removed by a vote of 2/3 of the homeowners at a special meeting called for that purpose. We have the required number of homeowners present for a quorum, and we called this meeting according to the proper notice requirements. Patricia looked at Margaret and Bill, clearly expecting them to back her up. Instead, Bill spoke. "Patricia, I think you should resign," he said quietly. "This has gone too far." Patricia looked at him like he had betrayed her. "Excuse me?" "What you did was wrong," Bill said, his voice getting stronger. "I've gone along with a lot of your decisions because I thought you were just being thorough, but this crossed a line. You nearly got a man killed because you were obsessed with rules." "I was doing my duty," Patricia insisted. "Your duty is to the community," Margaret said, speaking up for the first time. "And you failed us, Patricia. I'm sorry, but I agree with Bill. You should resign before this gets worse." Patricia looked around the room, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She was realizing she had no support left. "Fine," she said coldly. "Let's vote." We did. By secret ballot, to make sure everyone felt safe, voting their conscience. Sarah, Dan, and I counted the ballots while the room waited in tense silence. Out of 56 homeowners present, 53 voted to remove Patricia from the board. 3 abstained. No one voted in her favor. When we announced the results, the room burst into applause. Patricia sat frozen at the front table, her face pale. "The vote is final," Margaret said, taking control of the meeting. "Patricia Hendricks is removed from the board effective immediately. Patricia, please surrender any HOA documents, keys, and property you have." Patricia stood up stiffly. "You are all making a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "This community will fall apart without proper leadership." "We will be fine," I said. "Better than fine." Patricia grabbed her purse and walked out of the meeting, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. The door slammed behind her. The meeting continued for another hour. We voted to appoint temporary board members until a proper election could be held. Frank, Sarah, and a retired accountant named George Franklin were voted in. We also voted to immediately suspend the parking bylaw that Patricia had cited, pending a review of all HOA regulations to remove any that were overly restrictive or absurd. After the meeting, Elena hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for standing up to her." "Of course," I said. "How's Roberto doing?" "He's coming home tomorrow," Elena said, smiling through her tears. "The doctors say he is recovering beautifully." That night I felt like a weight had been lifted off the entire neighborhood. People lingered in the parking lot of the community center, talking and laughing. There was a sense of relief and camaraderie that I had never felt in Meadowbrook Heights before. But the story was not over yet. 2 weeks later, the county attorney's office announced that Patricia Hendricks was being charged with interfering with emergency services, a Class 1 misdemeanor. If convicted, she could face up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. Patricia hired a lawyer and pleaded not guilty. Her attorney argued that she had been exercising her legitimate authority as HOA president and had no intent to harm anyone. The prosecution argued that intent did not matter. She had knowingly interfered with paramedics treating a patient, and that was illegal, regardless of her motivations. The trial was held in Maricopa County Superior Court 2 months later, in late May. Several of us attended, including me, Sarah, Dan, Elena, and Frank. Carlos came down from Tucson to support his mother. The prosecution called the 2 paramedics as witnesses. The male paramedic, whose name I learned was David Mills, testified about what happened. "We were treating a patient in critical condition," David said on the stand. "Every second counts in a cardiac event. When Ms. Hendricks started banging on the ambulance doors and demanding we move the vehicle, it created a dangerous distraction. My partner had to stop what she was doing to deal with her, which delayed patient care." The female paramedic, Jennifer Ortiz, gave similar testimony. "I was preparing medications when I heard the banging on the doors," she said. "I had to leave the patient to go tell Ms. Hendricks to back off. Those 30 seconds could have made the difference between life and death." The defense tried to argue that Patricia's actions had not actually delayed care, but the paramedics were unshakable. They testified that any interruption during a critical emergency is dangerous and unprofessional. Frank testified next, and his video was played for the jury. Watching it again on the courtroom monitors with the audio clear and Patricia's voice demanding the ambulance be moved was damning. Several jury members looked shocked and disgusted. I testified about what I witnessed, as did Sarah and Dan. Elena testified about the emotional trauma of watching someone harass the people trying to save her husband's life. Patricia's lawyer tried to make the case that she had been following the HOA rules and had no malicious intent. Patricia herself took the stand and maintained that she had been doing her job. "I take my responsibilities as HOA president seriously," Patricia said primly. "The rules exist for a reason, and I was enforcing them." "Even when someone's life was at stake?" the prosecutor asked during cross-examination. "I did not believe anyone's life was at stake," Patricia said. "The ambulance had been there for 20 minutes. If it was a real emergency, they would have left already." "You heard the paramedics tell you that they were treating a cardiac patient, correct?" "Yes, but I thought they were exaggerating to avoid following the rules." The prosecutor let that statement hang in the air. "You thought paramedics were lying about a patient having a heart attack to avoid a parking violation?" Patricia seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, I thought perhaps they were being dramatic." It took the jury less than 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on 1 count of interfering with emergency services. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Rebecca Thornton, did not look sympathetic when she read the verdict. Patricia's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution recommended the maximum sentence as a deterrent. "This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated," the prosecutor said. "Ms. Hendricks showed a callous disregard for human life and interfered with emergency personnel doing their jobs. She has shown no remorse and continues to maintain she did nothing wrong." Patricia's lawyer argued for leniency, saying his client had no prior criminal record and had been punished enough by losing her position and becoming a national pariah. Judge Thornton was not swayed. "Ms. Hendricks, your actions on March 21st were reprehensible," the judge said. "You prioritized bureaucratic rules over a human life. You interfered with trained professionals trying to save a man having a heart attack, and even now, you do not seem to understand the gravity of what you did. I am sentencing you to 90 days in jail, suspended after 30 days served, 1 year of probation, and a fine of $2,000. You will also complete 100 hours of community service, which I am ordering to be performed at a hospital or emergency services facility, so perhaps you can learn to appreciate the work these professionals do." Patricia's face went white. She clearly had not expected actual jail time. Her lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but the judge denied a stay of the sentence. Patricia was taken into custody that day. Meanwhile, Carlos filed his civil lawsuit. It named Patricia personally and the HOA as defendants, seeking damages for emotional distress, negligent supervision, and medical expenses. The case never went to trial. The HOA's insurance company settled for an undisclosed amount, reportedly in the 6 figures. Patricia's personal assets were also at risk, and she ended up settling that part of the case as well. The publicity from the trial led to additional consequences for Patricia. She lost her job, she worked in pharmaceutical sales, and her company decided her notoriety was bad for business. She had to sell her house in Meadowbrook Heights because she could not afford the mortgage without her job, and because living in the neighborhood where everyone hated her was untenable. As for the HOA, we underwent major reforms. The new board, led by Frank, Sarah, and George, went through all the bylaws and removed or modified dozens of overly restrictive rules. We kept reasonable standards for property maintenance and noise, but eliminated petty restrictions on things like flower colors and basketball hoops. We also implemented new policies to prevent any future board member from abusing their power the way Patricia had. Board members now had term limits, and there was a clear process for residents to appeal any fines or violations. Roberto made a full recovery and was back to his normal routine within a few months. He and Elena remained grateful to the neighborhood for supporting them. They hosted a big barbecue that summer to thank everyone, and it became an annual tradition that helped bring the community together. The ambulance company sent a thank you letter to the neighborhood after learning that we had removed Patricia from the board and that she had been criminally charged. They said it was the first time they had heard of an HOA actually holding someone accountable for interfering with their work. The story had a lasting impact beyond just our neighborhood. Several states, including Arizona, passed laws explicitly exempting emergency vehicles from HOA parking restrictions. The laws became known informally as Patricia's Law, which I am sure thrilled her. As for me, the whole experience changed my perspective on community involvement. I'd always been the kind of person who kept to himself, did not go to HOA meetings, and just wanted to be left alone. But seeing what happened when someone like Patricia was given unchecked power, and seeing what a group of neighbors could accomplish when they came together, made me realize that participating in your community matters. I served on the HOA board for a year after the incident, helping to rebuild trust and establish the new policies. It was time-consuming and sometimes frustrating, but it was also rewarding. We turned Meadowbrook Heights from a neighborhood ruled by petty tyranny into a genuine community where people looked out for each other. Sarah and I ended up becoming close friends. We still live in the neighborhood and get together regularly for dinner or drinks. Dan moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, but we stay in touch. Frank became something of a local celebrity after his video went viral, and he good-naturedly accepts the occasional request for interviews or speaking engagements about HOA reform. Patricia served her 30 days in jail and completed her probation and community service. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Nevada and works in administrative support somewhere. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I honestly do not know if she did. Some people are so committed to being right that they can never admit they were wrong, even when the consequences are staring them in the face. The incident became a cautionary tale in HOA circles. I have been contacted by people from around the country asking for advice on dealing with power-hungry board members or reforming their own HOAs. I always tell them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights and your bylaws, organize your neighbors, and do not be afraid to stand up to bullies. Because at the end of the day, that is what Patricia was. She was a bully who used rules and regulations as weapons to control people and feel important. She cared more about enforcing arbitrary standards than about human life and basic decency. And when challenged, when her power was threatened, she doubled down and made everything worse. But she learned, as all bullies eventually do, that there are consequences for your actions. You can hide behind rules and authority for only so long before people see through it and hold you accountable. Patricia thought she was untouchable as HOA president. She thought the rules protected her and gave her unlimited authority. She was wrong. The neighborhood is better now than it ever was under her reign. We have reasonable rules that maintain property values without being oppressive. We have a board that listens to residents and treats them with respect. We have a community where people actually know and care about their neighbors rather than just looking for violations to report. And, most importantly, Roberto Ramirez is alive and well. He celebrated his 75th birthday last month with a big party that half the neighborhood attended. Elena gave a toast, thanking everyone for their support, and there was not a dry eye in the house. That, more than anything else, made everything worthwhile. When I think back to that Tuesday afternoon in March, watching an ambulance get harassed by a woman with a clipboard, I still feel angry. But I also feel grateful. Grateful that I lived in a community where enough people had the courage to say, enough is enough. Grateful that the legal system, despite its flaws, ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. Grateful that Roberto survived and that justice was served. Living in an HOA is not easy. There are always going to be rules and restrictions, and sometimes they are going to be frustrating. But it does not have to be a nightmare of petty tyranny. With the right people in charge, people who care about the community more than about power, an HOA can be a positive force that brings neighbors together rather than driving them apart. That is the lesson I took from the whole saga. Not that all HOAs are evil, but the communities are only as good or as bad as the people who run them. And when those people abuse their power, it is up to the rest of us to stand up and do something about it. So if you are reading this and you live in an HOA, pay attention to what your board is doing. Go to the meetings even when they are boring. Read the bylaws and understand your rights. And if you see someone abusing their power, do not just complain about it to your neighbors over the fence. Document it, organize, and take action. Because if we learned anything from Patricia Hendricks and her war on an ambulance, it is that silence and inaction only enable the worst among us. Change does not happen by itself. It happens when ordinary people decide they have had enough and do something about it. Meadowbrook Heights is proof of that. We went from a neighborhood afraid of our own HOA president to a community that came together, removed her from power, and built something better. It took work and courage and persistence, but we did it. And if we could do it, so can others. I still live in the same house, drive down the same streets, and see many of the same neighbors. But everything feels different now. There is less fear and more trust, less pettiness and more compassion. We are not just a collection of houses governed by rules anymore. We are an actual community, and that makes all the difference. And somewhere out there, hopefully Patricia Hendricks is a little bit wiser and a little less willing to prioritize rules over humanity. Though, honestly, I have my doubts about that. Some people never learn, but at least she cannot hurt anyone else the way she hurt Roberto and Elena and all of us who had to witness her callousness. The ambulance incident, as it became known in our neighborhood, will always be remembered, not just as a story of one woman's terrible judgment, but as a turning point for our community. The moment we decided we deserved better and actually did something to make it happen, that is the real story, and that is what matters most.